Charismatic Evolution is the newest set, and it's available now on Pokemon TCG Live. Today, we'll look at 4 online tournament results and analyze the top 8 decks from each of them and talk about the metagame a little bit along the way. Starting with the Tournament of Doom, which had 178 players on January 17th. Looking at the top 8 of this event, there were 3 Lugia getting 1st, 3rd, and 4th. 1 Palkia Dusknoir deck placing 2nd, 3 Dragapult EX decks, 2 of them Dragapult Dusknoir, 1 of them Dragapult with Iron Thorns, and then the 8th place deck list is Miraidon EX with Palkia V-Star. Out of these 8 decks in top 8 for this event, 4 of them played the new Budew card. So let's start with the first place, which is Lugia. And also let's talk about, is Lugia actually expected to be this good? Well, Lugia seems to be good against Budew decks. It's also good against Archaludon, which is good against Budew decks. So, yeah, Lugia might be really good in this metagame. It also got that new Regidrago card, which we should definitely take a look at here. With the Jewel Breaker attack for 4 colorless energy, it does 100 damage, but if the opponent's active is a Terra Pokemon, this attack does 230 more damage. So it does 330 damage, which is just ridiculous. Of course, it does cost 4 energy, and once Archeops rotates, that's going to be quite hard to fulfill. But for now, it's pretty easy because of Lugia and Archeops. That Regidrago is going to be the only new card here in the Lugia deck, but we'll see that they're actually not playing Cinccino at all. Now, the Cinccino line is what originally made me think that this deck had a good matchup against Archaludon. But the Weird Ear V can also go for one-shots against Archaludon, so that probably also does the job, but I did think that Cinccino would be the driving factor why Lugia V-Star is strong, but maybe that's not going to be the case. The first place Lugia ended up going 9-1-1, with its only loss being to a Dragapult Dusknoir deck. Along the way, we'll see that it beat Archaludon, Gardevoir, Palkia Dusknoir, Terapagos, Gholdengo, Lugia mirror matches, and then it also beat the Miraidon Palkia V-Star that I mentioned is in top 8. So Lugia played against a pretty large spread of decks here on its way to first place. Let's look at the other Lugias here. So we'll look at the third place one. This one is using the 2-2 line of Cinccino and not using the Weird Ear. So like I was alluding to, those are kind of interchangeable between each other. They both have the potential for big one-hit KOs, but obviously Weird Ear is just 1 card, while Cinccino is 4 cards, the 2-2 line of it. So it depends on how much of your deck space do you want to allocate to using the Cinccinos, or if you don't, then you could just go with the Weird Ear. But this one's also going to be using that Regidrago with Jewel Breaker that does 330 damage to Terra Pokemon. And a quick look at the 4th place Lugia as well. This one is actually playing a 1-1 Cinccino and 1 Weird Ear, so getting the best of both worlds and playing the new Regidrago as well. Next we have Palkia V-Star with Dusknoir, and this is also kind of becoming a Budew deck, playing 2 Budews. I think it makes sense here that going second you'll want to lead with Budew, to use Itchy Pollen, lock your opponent from using item cards, hopefully slowing them down enough that you buy yourself that extra turn you need, so that on turn 2 you can evolve into Palkia V-Star, you could evolve into Dusclops or Dusknoir. You can really mess with your opponent's board. So for example, if you're playing against a Charmander deck and you go Itchy Pollen, they don't evolve their Charmanders, then on that next turn you can go Curse Blast, or Star Portal and Moonlight Shuriken, take out the little Pokemon. If you're against Dragapult, you could take out their Dream this way. You're against Gardevoir and they don't have TM Evo, you could take out their Ralts or Curlies this way. So using that Budew for that first turn to stall a little bit, and then after that you can start raining down Curse Blasts, Moonlit Shurikens, whatever you need in that position. So I think the Palkia V-Star Dusknoir deck looks really strong with the inclusion of Budew into this metagame. Now we've got some Dragapult decks. So in 5th place we had Dragapult Dusknoir, And of course, this will be using the Budew. So many decks using Budew now. It's a really good card. And, you know, we're going to be looking to slow down the opponent same way, using Itchy Pollen on turn 1 going second. However, this also plays TM Evo. So if you're in a matchup where Itchy Pollen might not hurt the opponent so bad, then you might just end up going with Technical Machine Evolution to get your Dracloaks on board. That way next turn you can start using Recon Directive and evolve one into a Dragapult maybe. And you'll notice that this list is playing the Arven, Forestseal Stone, Lumineon package, but it's not playing Rotom V with the instant charge, and that's likely because most of the time you're going to be trying to use TM Evo or Itchy Pollen on your first turn. However, if you go first, I do wonder how often you'll miss the Rotom V. This Dragapult Dusknoir, which placed 5th, it only lost in top 8. So it went into Top Cut undefeated with a record of 7-0-1, beating decks like Charizard Pidgeot, Charizard Noctowl, Dragapult Mirror Matches, Lugia, and Gardevoir, ultimately losing to Palkia Dusknoir in top 8. Now moving on to 6th place Dragapult Iron Thorns. Although this one has a 4-4-2 line of Dragapult EX, it is very different from the previous one, because it's also playing 4 Iron Thorns, and this deck is built really differently overall, playing 4 Crispin so that you're able to accelerate energies, attack with Iron Thorns on turn 2, because of the Crispin, and also because of Dragapult and Iron Thorns differing energy costs. This deck plays 3 different type of energy. And interestingly, the ace spec for this one has become Precious Trolley. So if you start with Iron Thorns, you can go Precious Trolley for another Thorns, and then a bunch of Dreepies. Maybe you get a Toedscruel if Toedscruel helps in the matchup that you're in. Of course, the Toedscruel's Slime Mold Colony prevents your opponent from retrieving cards from their discard pile with the effects of abilities or trainer cards. That'll shut down something like Regidrago V-Star's Legacy V-Star power. It'll also shut down something like Superior Energy Retrieval in a Golden Go deck. And this deck does not play Budew because it's slowing down the game in a different way. It's slowing down with Iron Thorns EX's initialization ability, which shuts down all rule box abilities except for future Pokemon, which essentially just means all rule box ability. And although you might think that because this deck plays Iron Thorns, it would just run over Lugia's, Lugia is actually what beat this deck in top 8. On the way to top 8, it also lost to a Charizard Pidgeot, and it beat a myriad of other decks like Regidrago, Raging Bolt, Terapagos, Miraidon, and Gardevoir. And in 7th place, we have Dragapult Dusknoir. Nothing too crazy or special going on with this deck list. We'll see that the Dragapult Dusknoirs are typically playing Sparkling Crystal as their ace spec, which reduces the energy cost of your Tera Pokemon by 1 of any color. So that's really helpful for Dragapult EX since Phantom Dive costs an Awkward, Fire, and Psychic. These decks also play Crispin typically to help out with the Awkward energy costs sometimes as well. And yeah, nothing too different here with this Dragapult Dusknoir list. And lastly, for this January 17th event, 8th place was Ceruledge Palkia V-Star. So Ceruledge EX Palkia V-Star, definitely not a new deck, but it's also not a super popular deck. These cards are an unlikely pairing, just because Ceruledge EX wants a whole bunch of energy in the discard pile. Palkia V-Star kind of goes well with that because it can accelerate water energies out of the discard pile. And then you use Radiant Greninja because Concealed Cards is good with a high energy deck because you get to draw cards often with it. You're also putting energy cards in the discard pile, which you want for Ceruledge EX's Abyssal Flames. And then Moonlight Shuriken can be powered up in just a single turn thanks to Palkia V-Star's Star Portal. Budew is a good addition to this deck because this deck can pretty much do nothing on its first turn. So going second for a deck like this would originally have been very bad because you have Charcadets, you have Palkia V, have none of your Pokemon that are really doing anything yet because you need to wait to evolve into them. However, Budew can try to slow time down a little bit. If you go second, use that Itchy Pollen and lead with a Pokemon you don't really care if it gets KO'd, but also item lock your opponent to hopefully slow them down until you can start evolving into your stronger Pokemon. So we're going to see that strategy used a lot because of Budew. It's hard to make too many inferences based off of the matchup data from these smaller events. As you'll see here, Saralege Palkia was able to defeat a Lugia in round 6, but then ultimately lost to it in Top Cut. And let's take a quick look at the metagame before we move on to the next online event. The most popular decks for this tournament of just under 200 people were Gardevoir, Lugia, Dragapult, Dusknoir, and then we start dwindling down here into the 5% range after that with Charizard, Archaludon. Actually, this Dragapult should probably also be paired with the Dragapult Dusknoir. So Dragapult Dusknoir was actually like the most popular deck if you include that were not sorted with it, probably just because they played one less Dusknoir. Looking at win percentages though, Lugia Archeops had a good win percentage, which is also pretty valid because of how many Lugia Archeops and how many games they played. Gardevoir also had a pretty good win percentage. Miraidon also had a pretty good win percentage, but there were only 6 of it, so it played less games, so the win percentage is less valid. However, it's not as invalid as something all the way down here like Dragapult Iron Thorns. There were only 2 of them, so if all 2 of them did well, then the win percentage gets spiked. So but yeah, looking up here, the high win percentages are Lugia, Gardevoir, and maybe we could call Miraidon a validly high win percentage. Moving on to the next tournament held on January 18th. This one had about 150 or so players, and the top 8 looks a little different this time, except it also has 3 Lugia Archeopses in top 8. So let's start with the first place one, which is going to be Miraidon EX. And I just mentioned that on the 17th, Miraidon had a pretty good win percentage in that tournament, and then this is the next day. So maybe people started to take note that Miraidon was looking good. It's not too hard to make that assumption though, or to find that out, because Lugia was doing really well, and Miraidon's really good against Lugia. A quick review of this Miraidon EX deck list will show that there are 0 new cards in it. There's not really anything new from Prismatic Evolutions I would have expected to pop up in here. Yeah, this is just built like a typical Miraidon list, so why don't we go and take a look at its matchups from this event. So like I said, it won the event, and it finished with an impressive record of 11-1-1. Its only loss was in Swiss, Part 1 Swiss, against a Dragapult Iron Thorns, and that could be a really bad matchup when they start with Iron Thorns, because you have so many abilities that you want to use to get set up. Along the way, this player went up against 4 Lugia decks, and they went 4-0 against it, which is to be expected from Miraidon. Also along the way, defeating other Miraidon Mirror, Gardevoir, Dragapult, Dusknoir, Lost Zone Box, Archaludon, defeating a whole bunch of things. Like I said, it only lost 1 round, and that was to Dragapult Iron Thorns, and in Top Cut ended up beating Lugia, Miraidon, then Lugia. Again, we'll see no new cards in this Miraidon deck, but they are playing Minior, which is typically used as a counter against retreat lock strategies. So when you attach an energy to Minior, it brings itself into the active position, and this deck has plenty of energy to go around. So that Minior can get you out of something like Snorlax's block, or Mawile, or Water Mask Ogerpon's Saw block attack. So that's typically what it's there for. Of course, in a pinch, if you need to deal fighting weak damage to something, it could probably also be used for that, but mostly here, I think, just as a precaution to stall strategies. Aside from that, these Miraidon decks are going to look pretty much the same. Looking back to Sacramento Regionals, the first and second place lists there kind of set the stage for Miraidon for quite a while, it seems, because all lists have looked really similar to those, using Pikachu EX as the Terra Pokemon so that Area 0 Underdepths can give you an 8-wide bench, and then you just have so many support Pokemon, so the deck feels really strong because you have all the support from Latios and Fez and Mew EX, and you have room for Magnemite Magneton on the board that can accelerate energy, so it's a pretty explosive aggro deck. So this Miraidon went 10-2, just slightly worse than the other Miraidon, which it lost to in top 4, which went 11-1-1. This Miraidon player actually went up against 4 Cloth Terapagos decks. One of them don't show the Cloth because there's only one included in it. But it went 3-1 against the Cloth Terapagos Budew decks, which is quite impressive, since Cloth, of course, can one-shot lightning Pokemon pretty easily because it's a fighting type Pokemon. However, the Cloth Terapagos decks do have a whole bunch of double prizers on the board that Miraidon can try to pick off, so I guess that's the strategy there. But yeah, only losing to a Cloth Terapagos, 1 out of 4 of them, and then losing to the Miraidon Mirror in top 4. In second place, we had a Lugia Archeops deck, which uniquely included a Flutter Mane. This could be used to shut off Iron Thorns' initialization ability if it's in the active, so I assume that's what that is there for, just in case they ran into any Iron Thorns decks, which it doesn't look like they did here, so that Flutter Mane probably did not get much use. Then there's another Lugia down in 5th place, this one actually including Radiant Charizard, with 1 Luminous Energy in the deck as well, and also a Thornton, so some pretty interesting inclusions there. And then 1 more Lugia in top 8, this one also playing a Thornton, nothing else too incredibly unique though. All of them, of course, including the new Regidrago. 4th place Dragapult with Dusknoir, this one's also using a Thornton, which is a card that we see tossed around a good bit in online events and actually in Japanese events. I don't see it tossed into decks as much from North American and EU players. I think it's just a card that it could be so impactful in a pinch, but it's also like a card that you need at very specific times. So I think that's why it's a card that's often left out of deck lists. But cool to point out here that they are playing a Thornton in this Dragapult Dusknoir deck. And then we have our first Cloth Terapagos Budew deck of top 8 of the video. So this, as Azul GG said in his recent video, this is more of a Budew deck now than a Cloth deck. There's only 1 Cloth here. But Budew works so well in this deck because you can activate Poison with Brute Bonnet's Toxic Powder, and you can choose to either poison Budew, or maybe you poison the Pokemon that was in the active and then retreat him to Budew. And then with Radiant Hisuian Sneasler, of course, you're buffing the poison damage, so now your opponent's taking the 10 from Itchy Pollen, plus the 30 poison damage in between turns. And if you do choose to poison your Budew and you attach a Binding Mochi to it, now your Itchy Pollen's doing 50 damage, and then they're taking 30 more from poison in between turns. So that's a total of 80 damage plus item lock. And if they get knocked out by the poison between turns, that means they're not going to be able to use things like Pheasantipity's Flip the Script and Unfair Stamp, because that Pokemon got knocked out in between turns, not during the opponent's turn. In addition to Budew, the other new card here is Black Belt's Training. The Black Belt's Training will allow a Terapagos EX to one-shot a Charizard EX. And that's necessary since this deck list is not playing Hisuian Electrode V and Super Effective Glasses, which would have been the older way to one-shot a Charizard. So Terapagos EX with a full bench of 8 and a DTE attached will do 220. Then with Black Belt's Training, 260. Then with Binding Mochi, if you're poisoned, it does 300. Then the poison plus Radiant Hisuian Sneasler's poison, the +2, will be 3 damage counters of poison in between turns. So that equals 330 damage, and Charizard can be KO'd. So this deck, I think, is pretty complicated to play just because you need to choose between Terapagos, Budew, Cloth. You can even use the baby Pekkarunt to take knockouts with poison. You can use Blood Moon or Saluna. There's a lot of choices to make with which Pokemon to put on your board, which Pokemon to attack with, which Pokemon do we need to put these tools on, do we need to use poison, what supporter do we need to use? Do we need to use something like Black Belt's Training, or do we need to use a Boss's Orders for turn? There's a lot of choices to make with this deck, but I do think it's very, very strong. This Terapagos Budew Cloth pilot ended up losing to a mirror match and a Lugia. but then it won a whole bunch of rounds in a row. So beating Gardevoir, Archaludon, Dragapult, Dusknoir, Regidrago, Chien-Pao, ultimately losing in the end to Lugia. And then the last for top 8 in this tournament is Snorlax Stall. So Snorlax Stall, we won't spend too much time on. It is using a couple of cards that aren't always in the deck, like Kofu. Put 2 cards from your hand on the bottom of your deck in any order, and then you draw 4 cards. It's also using Miracle Headset. Put up to 2 supporter cards from your discard pile into your hand, which is a pretty cool ace spec to use in this deck. I also definitely want to point out the Klefki in this deck. So the Klefki, I think it's just there to, like I said, disrupt turbo decks like the Cloth Terapagos Budew or the Miraidon very early so that they don't get to set up. And then from there, you just disrupt them the rest of the game like a normal Snorlax Stall deck. And of course, we got Cornerstone Ogerpon and Mimikyu here as walls. This Snorlax Stall deck lost to a Terapagos Budew Cloth, lost to a Lugia, and then in top 8 lost to Miraidon. However, it was able to beat 2 Lugia Archeopses, and it beat 3 Gardevoirs as well as a Cloth Budew Terapagos, Raging Bolt, and a Dragapult Dusknoir. A quick look at this tournament's metagame. Lugia Archeops had a really good win rate again in this one. And then we also see that Gardevoir having a pretty good win rate. And Miraidon, there were only 4 Miraidons. They had a 73% win rate. Again, when there's not as many decks, it's hard to take this as reliable data. But just looking there to see, yeah, this deck had a pretty good win rate. But yeah, out of the decks that were popular, Lugia Archeops had the best win rate of this event. Moving on to the next event, this one is from January 19th, and we're just going to look at the archetypes that we haven't spotlighted yet in this video. So, Lugia did win this event, but let's look at the second place Regidrago deck. So the second place Regidrago deck is pretty cool because it's playing a 1/1 line of Flareon EX. So it's important to note first that this Eevee has the boosted evolution ability. As long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, it can evolve during your first turn or the turn you play it. So that means that you can evolve into Flareon EX on turn 1. Ideally turn 1 going second. And Flareon EX has the Burning Charge attack. It does 130 damage, and then search your deck for up to 2 basic energy cards and attach them to one of your Pokemon. So if you're able to attach a fire energy to this and then energy switch one from a Teal Mask Ogerpon to the Flareon, you can use Burning Charge as early as turn 1. And then you also accelerate 2 more energies from your deck, probably to your Regidrago V. So this is something really cool that I had not seen yet, so I definitely wanted to point it out. Additionally, it's playing a Latias EX to give all of your basic Pokemon free retreat. This can be good because sometimes the opponent may try to bring up your backup Regidrago V and like hit it with Budew and item lock, and now you have a 0 energy 3 retreat Regidrago V in the active. Well, with Latias EX available, that won't happen. It also allows you to much more easily get into the Eevee. So if you want to do the Eevee into Flareon Burning Charge turn 1, having Latias EX on the board is going to make that much more possible. Of course, this deck is not playing any Switch, so it's playing the Latias EX in place of Switch. And looking at that Regidrago, it went undefeated until finals. So this Regidrago V-Star deck with Flareon went 11-1-1. Beating a whole slew of decks. Now, some of these look a little memey. We've got a Palafin deck. We've got an Azumarill deck. We've got a Roaring Moon EX with Dusknoir. So definitely, you know, it's definitely an online event. You're hitting some decks that you might not see at top tables at a big regional event. But nonetheless, it was able to go 11-1-1, only losing to Lugia in the finals. And then also definitely notable here in 6th place is Lost Zone Giratina. Lost Zone Giratina V-Star. It's been a little while since we've talked about this one. And honestly, it looks like nothing has changed since months ago when we talked about this deck, except Monkey Dory. So this has 1 Monkey Dory and 1 Dark Energy. But Other than that, nothing has really changed for this deck. It hasn't been played much at all in competitive environments. I don't think it's really that competitive of a deck, but if you know how to play your deck and it runs well, pretty much anything can shine in online events. And this Lost Zone Giratina deck played against a lot of Dragapult Dusknoir. So it went, let's see, it went 3-1-1 against Dragapult Dusknoir. Lost to a Terapagos Dusknoir deck. Was able to beat a Cloth Terapagos Budew, beat a Lugia, beat a Gardevoir, beat some sort of Iron Valley and EX deck, and then eventually the 3-1-1. The loss to the Dragapult EX was in top 8. And moving on to the last tournament we're going to look at today from January 21st, we're just going to look at the unique decks here that we haven't already covered. First place here, going 9-1, was Palkia V-Star with Noctowl. This deck is utilizing the Glass Trumpet to get energies onto Terapagos EX. So you've also got the Area 0 Underdepths. So Palkia V-Star's Subspace Swell and Terapagos EX, they both swing for more damage based on the amount of benched Pokemon. Terapagos EX, just your benched Pokemon. Palkia V-Star is based on yours and your opponent's benched Pokemon. So they work well together, especially with Area 0 Underdepths, and the Glass Trumpet allows your Terapagos EXs to be ready to attack in just one turn without the use of double turbo energy. And then, of course, Noctowl is going to be the deck's main engine of searching your deck for trainer cards, as long as you have a Terra Pokemon in play. And like I said, this Palkia Noctowl deck went 9-1. Actually, its only loss was a missed round in round 1. It won every single game that they played, so that's really amazing. Beating a Dragapult Dusknoir, a Lugia, a Raging Bolt, a Goldengo, 2 Gardevoirs, 2 Miraidons, and a Ceruledge. And just looking here in the top 8, we'll see that there's another Palkia deck. There's a Palkia Dusknoir, something similar to what we've already looked at, except this one plays a 1-1 line of, or a 1-0 line of Greninja EX, which I really like. Greninja EX is an awesome card. And then there's also 2 Miraidons in top 8 here, a Ceruledge, a Lugia, a Dragapult Dusknoir, and the last deck that we'll look at today, Archaludon, or Archaludon. I kind of think Archaludon sounds better, but I've heard that it might be Archaludon is the correct pronunciation. So I'm sure somebody will complain about that in the comments. But Archaludon, let's go with Archaludon. I'm going to take a lucky guess and say that that might be the correct way to say it. So Archaludon EX has the Assemble Alloy ability, which allows you to accelerate 2 metal energy from your discard pile. And then you try to essentially loop these Archaludons with Professor Toro's Scenario and Scoop Up Cyclones. So you evolve, you accelerate energy, you swing for 220, you take a hit, you Toro or Scoop Up Cyclone, you do it all over again. So it's a deck that's trying to tank. I think that's pretty cool because Archaludon is a big tanky Pokemon, so it makes sense. And this one's actually playing 1 Budew. So typically when we see this deck, we're going to be expecting to see some amount of Dialga V and Dialga V-Star. This one is just all Archaludon all the time. And this was a bit of a smaller and a shorter tournament, so this Archaludon deck went 6-2. Beating 2 Gardevoir, 1 Mirror Match, 1 Charizard, Dragapult Thorns, and a Lost Zone, losing to Charizard Pidgeot and to Lugia Archeops. If you're interested to see more of these deck lists and more online tournament results, you can check out play.limitlesstcg.com. You can also enter into these tournaments for free. If you're interested in free educational resources, check out my Substack, which will be linked below. I often write about practice and mindsets and all sorts of things that will help you to improve at the Pokemon TCG in article form. Over on Metafy, I offer one-on-one coaching, as well as an all-inclusive competitive Pokemon TCG Masterclass. If you're looking to get better at the game quickly and really understand everything that's going on, I highly suggest checking those resources out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.